I'm sure that government officials are hired occasionally who actually might care about how taxpayer dollars are spent. And perhaps some of them would prefer not to waste those tax dollars. Unfortunately, for where I live, none of those officials work in Thurston County. Now today, I'm going to discuss how a handful of bureaucrats and a slick property vendor and local elected officials can squander most of the taxpayer dollars that you give them, even on simple projects like a new building. Is it corruption? I don't know. How much corruption is involved? That's hard to tell. Who's paying off whom? Also very hard to tell. But we have a short list of players involved, and as always, we name names, and as ugly as this story might be, we still report the truth, even if what is left of traditional media, they just decide to ignore the story. And I also provide some policy changes that would probably help in the future on cases like this. So essentially, this story is really just about a small cadre of bureaucrats and how they managed to squander $10 million of tenant improvement dollars for a $2.5 million remodel on a building that only cost the new owner $4.5 million just a few years ago. And of course, sticking the taxpayers with an exorbitant yearly lease of about $1.6 million, a price that escalates every year moving forward. Now, how did taxpayer dollars get stuck with this extra mystery $7.5 million bill? And exactly where did it go? Well, we can't answer every question, but we can certainly explore the fiasco here. Now, before we get to the story, however, I just want to remind you to hit the subscribe, the like, and share buttons down below. It doesn't cost you anything but a few seconds of your time. However, it does help promote this video and others like it, even when YouTube and others work to shadow ban or restrict the reach of stories like this. And generally, stories about government corruption and incompetence are frequently suppressed on this platform, so they won't automatically promote it. And instead, sharing these videos, and that instead of like cat videos or shuffle dance videos, that's why it'll help if you share them, because if you like them, you can share them with others who might care. You can text it, you can email a link, or you can share it on your social media platform of choice. So feel free to share it with your favorite local bureaucrats as well. I'm sure that they'll appreciate it. So leave any comments you have below, whether you like or disagree with what I'm sharing. Regardless, everything helps to get the truth out there. So, back to Thurston County. Now, I'm no stranger to writing stories about the endless incompetence, failures, and corruption in Thurston County. I live here, so it's a topic that interests me. Thurston County is located in western Washington state, with kind of the wet side of the state, and also contains the state capital of Olympia. Now, most state agencies and many local federal agency offices are actually located here, so a lot of government workers, they actually live here. Now, this makes Thurston County the best place to find whistleblowers and an important place to look if you are uncovering stories about the endless incompetence and the corruption of local government. Now, Thurston County has a long and ugly history of egregious and kind of widely mocked examples of poor choices, complete incompetence, and always with the high priority of squandering the tax dollars that they get, particularly when it comes to buildings. Because no matter how many examples that we provide demonstrating this collective failure, the answer from local bureaucrats and most elected officials is to double down on dumb and see if they can top the previous fiasco. Along the way, as the money gets wasted and lost, they always seek new ways to increase taxes so that they can make the next disaster even more spectacular. And it's not a virtuous cycle, but the addiction our local bureaucrats seem to have to waste, failure, and incompetence is really so ingrained and consistent that we're really only amazed when someone does something that isn't really a complete disaster. Now, today I want to discuss the latest Thurston County building fiasco, which is just a leased building that's located on Pacific Avenue. It's called the Atrium Building. And you can see where it's located in relationship to the state capitol and the old Thurston County building in this map, where Thurston County kept the majority of their government operations since the 1970s. The old location is still used for the Thurston County Superior Court. However, this new building is the new, bright, and shiny sinkhole of taxpayer funds used to house many of Thurston County's government operations. And this includes the auditor's office, where you pay for your vehicle license tabs, marriage licenses, register to vote, etc. And this includes the county commissioners, the county treasurer, the assessor, and other offices like that. A lot of bureaucrats are located here now. So this site has been controversial from the start. The building was an old retail location, best known as the local Pay and Pack and then Ernst hardware store. And it was converted into office space and used for a number of years as a location for the Washington State Liquor Control Board as well. So this mundane background all changed, however, when a new owner named DM Ventures Pacific LLC purchased this building for $4.5 million on June 17th, 2019. Now that was a pretty good deal considering the fact that the Thurston County assessor valued the place at $10.3 million that year, but nobody has ever accused the assessor's office of honestly representing true property values. Now, almost immediately after the Atrium Building was purchased by this new owner, senior Thurston County bureaucrats decided that they had to use this facility for their new base of bureaucratic operations. And it was a serious, four-alarm fire panic on their part. And it's never made a lot of sense to me why they were in such a rush and panic to move into this place. But partly this might have to do with the fact that in their previous longtime location, they had colluded with a majority of the county commissioners for many years to ignore a leaky roof, and they had done their best to willfully ignore maintenance for many, many decades on the old location. I mean, it took a lot of effort and a lot of planning for them to actually trash the old Lake Ridge building owned by the county since they built it in the 1970s. But after decades of willful neglect, the senior management finally had convinced insiders that they had no choice but to move. Now, rather than building a new building, which is something the current bureaucratic leadership, including County Manager Ramiro Chavez and former treasurer, but now basically Assistant County Manager Robin Campbell, they had proven that this was impossible for them to effectively do. So, I mean, really impossible. So they decided to lease a new building instead. So this atrium location was considered the best option for them. Now, local residents have long been skeptical of Thurston County's ability to really do anything well or even marginally competently based on just a lot of recent experience. Most well-known was Thurston County's nationally mocked and very well-exposed new jail, which of course they don't call a jail, but they actually call it the Accountability and Restitution Center, or ARC with a C for short, not to be confused with ARC with a K like Noah's Ark. So even though we probably do need an ark to float on all the waste and the corruption that we find here, but anyway, so Thurston County, they built this jail in 2010 for $45 million. It's about $61 million when you actually count the interest payments, but who considers those costs? And after the voters of Thurston County rejected by a massive margin a bloated jail proposal in 2004 for $103 million, or approximately $120 million after repayment costs. So this new jail was certainly needed, but these clowns couldn't seem to put one up without squandering just every dollar they got. So the Democrats on the Thurston County Commission, with kind of cheerleading by the senior bureaucrats at the time, they decided to vote to borrow the money anyway and then just build the ark with no covenant, of course. They demonstrated their incompetence at every step of this way, and they forgot to factor in maintenance or operations costs. So the brand new jail just sat vacant and empty for 6 years, unused. I mean, eventually it took a new commission in 2016 after every Democrat was rejected from the county commission before Thurston County figured out how to actually put this jail into operation. Now, at the same time, as I wrote about a few years ago, and I've shown here, but I've linked it down below, Thurston County had previously purchased a building called the 3400 building back in 1998. That building, which is pictured here, it originally cost the taxpayers $4 million. It sat vacant for 18 years. And it cost the county about $8 million in upgrades, TI work, and money wasted despite the vacancy. I mean, it was empty this whole time. And the county gave away much of the property to a homeless shed kind of project next door called Camp Quixote. And then they finally sold the building a few years ago for less than it was purchased almost 2 decades before. Now, more recently, Thurston County staff attempted to gin up support for this new mega courthouse operations facility in 2019. And this was a proposed $440 million super fiasco project designed to fail. And of course, be located in downtown Olympia next to all the homeless junkie camps. Now, I produced 4 different videos on it at the time, and the obvious blowback and widespread public mockery of the certain-to-fail project finally caused even Thurston County staff and the judges to abandon that effort in early 2020, which is kind of a good background, and it leads us to the Atrium facility that taxpayers are leasing today. Now, there are many problems with this new building, and I can't get into every aspect of the failure in this case, but I'll just cover basically the highlights or the lowlights, depending on how you look at it. First, the staff, mainly led by County Manager Ramiro Chavez and Assistant County Manager Robin Campbell, they promised more parking at this new location. And this, by the way, is just always one of the promises that the senior staff seem to make to justify a new building every time. And just like Charlie Brown's football, it tends to be one of the first promises to get pulled away. So much of the promised parking has failed to materialize. It's always crowded, just like the old location, and this leaves taxpayers shouldering the additional unforecasted costs of trying to rent or lease more parking locations. They have these nearby the building. But this is the least of the lies that actually led to this location. To me, the biggest problem is just the egregious waste of funds for what is called TI work, which stands for Tenant Improvements. Now, it isn't uncommon for a new major tenant of a commercial facility to demand changes to that building to better accommodate their ability to use the place the way they actually want. However, in this case, the demands by Thurston County to the landlord was to make some changes to the building, which were valued at about $2.25 million. Now, how do I know the value? Because the landlord had to go and apply for a permit with the city of Olympia. You can see it linked below. And he clearly states that the value of this remodel work is going to be $2.25 million. So you can see the number right here. And I'll also note that for the record that despite state law requirements that they get multiple bids for this work, this apparently wasn't done. And this is a no-bid remodel, and it was accepted just at face value costs. However, not content to just make this a typical failure, Thurston County decided to push this fiasco out of the usual amateur multi-million-dollar disaster range, and instead they decided to blow up into a $10 million on this $2.25 million remodel work. They're just under $10 million so far. They've estimated they're going to spend about $10 million. So where did this money go? Well, most of it went to the landlord supposedly supervising the $2.25 million remodel. Now wait, I know you might ask, particularly if you don't have a Common Core math background, $10 million is way more than $2.25 million, which is a great observation. Clearly, you are more qualified to run Thurston County than any of the six-figure bureaucrats that we currently employ there. But your ability to do math might also disqualify you from working there because clearly there's a gravy train of cash that's missing here, and I'm not sure where it ultimately ended up. And in case you're wondering, nobody at Thurston County is willing to discuss this either. I've emailed them questions, and there are apparently no good answers. So silence probably seems safer. Now, there's a lot of possible scenarios to explain this fiasco, but none of them are very good. Maybe the landlord lied to the city of Olympia about the original remodel. It's hard to imagine he lied that much, but maybe, in which case he should be called out on it. Now, I'm used to seeing government contracts, and sure, the state, pretty much they always bloat and squander taxpayer cash on these types of projects. And typically, they cost twice what they should. However, they don't usually cost 4 times what they should, even in Thurston County. Now, I know what you might be thinking, because yes, I'm thinking it too. Who exactly got paid off? And particularly on this one. And I really can't answer that for sure, but it remains a pretty short list. On one hand, there are only 3 elected officials who sit on the commission, and one of them, Independent Gary Edwards, has typically voted against this fiasco at pretty much every step of the way. So that leaves us with 2 Democrat commissioners, Carolyn Mejia and Ty Menser. And to be fair to Mejia and Menser, however, I've reviewed a lot of the emails, the contracts, proposals, etc. that are involved in this project, and there's no doubt that the staff has been lobbying for this project long before Mejia was even elected in 2020, and only Commissioner Menser has been an enthusiastic supporter of the project from the beginning. I'd certainly suggest Commissioner Ty Menser should be put under the microscope on this project, not just because he claims he has a law degree, but he also claims he graduated from Harvard and Berkeley, and the reality is these fancy degrees just don't mean what they once did, and I'm not giving them a pass on this, but the relentless lobbying of staff and the false information presented to the commissioners over time will inevitably influence elected officials to make votes that are harmful to the public. Again, they don't get a pass, but this should be put in context of what's, I think, actually going on. So what about County Manager Romero Chavez and Assistant Manager Robin Campbell? I mean, who knows? There's actually no way to know if they've taken bribes or been unduly influenced by someone in this process. I mean, the only way you could really know is if you looked at all their bank accounts, including any numbered accounts overseas and their families, etc. I mean, plus you'd have to actually audit the cash trail from the taxpayers all the way to the ultimate endpoint, and there's nobody in government today willing to look into that. And nobody really wants to upset the apple cart here. After all, if you start to unravel a thread like this, who knows where it will all end up? I mean, maybe nowhere, but probably it would unravel other stories that really nobody wants you to see. Now, what about the county auditor, Mary Hall? Are you kidding? I mean, this is all actually happening with her blessing, and she should probably be on the short list of those who should be investigated. I mean, after all, another point brought up by local activists and perpetual pain in the government's behind, John Pettit, who has identified the fact that the county apparently hasn't even properly allocated the funding for this mystery $10 million, and the county auditor should be completely aware of this. After all, it's her software accounting program that shows that this is true. So complaints have been filed, of course, to the state auditor's office as well. But if those guys can't do anything effective about the missing $500 million funds from the Washington State Employment Security Department fiasco of 2020, or the hundreds of millions of dollars that are mystery missing funds under Ross Hunter at the Washington State Department of Children, Youth, and Families, well, do you really think that they will care about missing millions of dollars in Thurston County? Not likely. Unless they're basically tasked to cover up the truth, the auditors at any level in our state apparently will not be engaged on this one. So what about Attorney General Bob Ferguson? I mean, I laughed about that too originally, of course, because Bob Ferguson's mostly focused on his future political aspirations to be governor in the state, and he believes that path is best paved by silencing dissent, censoring citizens, persecuting Tim Eyman, unleashing violent sex predators on our communities, destroying people who would testify at school boards, and then, of course, trying to shut down thrift stores in the state. Ferguson has repeatedly demonstrated that he will always turn a blind eye to missing monies and ensure that nobody in government's ever going to be held accountable, no matter what happens, for anything, unless he finds out that they're a Republican or it turns out they can think for themselves. And either category of bureaucrat would be viewed as a domestic violent extremist by Bob Ferguson anyway. So really, what's left to do? Now, first of all, Thurston County is not alone in demonstrating their corruption or incompetence, and really, where do you draw that line? But start looking closer at the decisions made where you live, in your local government. And I suggest you do that, because I don't care if you think you have Republicans or Democrats in charge. The ugly truth is that the bureaucrats run the show in most cases. Elected officials there are rapidly becoming figureheads in most jurisdictions, and I'm strongly opposed to this abuse of the administrative state, but this is really how things tend to operate in most places. I really don't care if you're in rural Idaho or downtown San Francisco. However, if you're likely and almost certain to find stories like this where you live today, if you're willing to look, but you have to look carefully and dig into the truth. Don't expect the traditional media to report on these things. They won't, or they can't, or perhaps they've been told to look for secret MAGA hats under the bed somewhere else. So in the end, it is up to us to find the truth and to share it widely. I also believe that this situation, just like thousands of similar stories uncovered over the years, raises a number of policy reforms that may be impossible with Democrat Party majorities today, but which should be implemented when there is a changing of the political guard, or perhaps just another wave of revulsion over this type of corruption in the near future. It helps to have a plan in advance, even if it seems like that is a long time in the future. One of these changes should be the fact that all senior employees in government at both the state and local level, they should be required to file financial disclosure information, just like politicians. And this should include information about their spouses and children if they're also recipients of jobs, mystery cash, or other assets in their name. Corrupt people will lie, of course, but their lies can be exposed by those willing to look closer. And right now, we don't even have that much information to explore. Now, clearly, there's no real effective way at addressing regulatory capture in our society or local government today. We find repeat examples where those tasked with uprooting corruption refuse to do so, or worse, they see their job priority to conceal the corruption that they do find. It appears distressingly easy to neuter or essentially co-opt the county and the state auditors and, of course, the Washington State Attorney General's office. I mean, worse than that, anyone who actually questions their failures is likely to attract scary threats and potential harassment directed their way, rather than towards those who might be stealing or wasting taxpayer dollars. Now, some of this is because of political alliances, but it's often much more than that. I mean, not just the blue team, red team drama. Even when you have people who theoretically are from different political teams, the regulators are timid and they're fearful of exposing the truth. Now, I'm not sure how to optimally change this situation, but I'm open to suggestions. And it's clear today that this problem is really national. Just look at how easy FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried bought out the whole political establishment in D.C. They laundered campaign cash to buy out Republicans as well. And basically how he essentially controlled the regulators right from the beginning, right from day one. Now, there are other policy actions that can be taken to improve transparency, increase penalties for the abusers of the law, and increase the regulator structure to ensure that the law is applied even to political insiders. it's worth considering these legal and structural changes, what they would look like and how you can apply them to real-world situations. It's not obvious that it's very obvious right now to me anyway, that we're not served well by our current bureaucracy at any level of government, local, state, or federal. However, we have also kind of created this Gordian knot of bureaucracy that has intertwined itself into everything, and it'll probably just take more than a few tweaks to undo the mess. So until then, I think we can just gaze in awe, wonder, and disgust at fiascos like this Atrium Building in Thurston County. It's worth exposing the truth. It is worth questioning authority, even if our Attorney General Bob Ferguson wants to imprison you for doing so. And it's also worth sharing the truth with others, because the old traditional media won't do so anymore. In the end, it all starts with you, and the future belongs to those who show up.